folks. We are, and you're going to find me probably a little loud because my ear is stuffed and I can't hear a thing. So, yeah, let's see what I can do here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? Better? All right.
Doodah.
Thank you. This is Los Angeles, and it's March the 18th, and we are here on the topic of how people learn. I'm Mike Jacobs. I'm from Hamilton, Virginia, and John Sybalsky is from Oakland, California. We're going to be taking an approach on talking about the theory on how people learn, and then John has a very practical approach towards that aspect. I've done the How People Learn seminar here before a number of different times, and about 15, 20 years ago. Turn it down. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I can't even tell what I'm hearing. I'm in 2. 1, 2, 3. Good. Okay. Now I can't hear anything. Anyway, it about 20 years ago came out the first approaches towards talking about people's learning styles. And how that we can best teach people of different learning styles. There may be ways of introducing things and showing things that you may not understand the logic behind why people learn that way, but yet they do learn that way. The original theory of learning styles said there were 3 major learning styles: auditory, visual, and tactile kinesthetic. Some theorists now talk about 4 learning styles, that they've separated tactile and kinesthetic from each other. Others have now gone as far as identifying 7 learning styles. For my approach to things, I still think that the 3 learning styles is really the approach you need to take in trying to evaluate people on the floor and how you can best appeal to them. Now, people tend to have a major learning style, a minor learning style, and then one he doesn't connect with at all. For instance, I am a primary tactile kinesthetic learner. It's the environment of where I learn is how I associate things with it. So I remember where I learned a square dance call. That helps me to identify it when I go to do it. There's things I do when I dance. For instance, when I'm the point of a diamond, I literally point. I don't let myself have to think about and identify the spot. I'm pointing, therefore I'm the point of a diamond. When I'm dancing sashayed, I go to palms down with the person that's beside me. And when I'm dancing the boys part, I'm palms up to the person beside me. Those little physical characteristics help me to identify what I'm doing and how I'm going to do it right away. The interesting thing about studying learning styles as an approach towards teaching is that you don't have to worry about the successful learner. Successful learners, no matter what their style, find ways of making the teach of anything appeal to themselves and focus on their learning style. It's unsuccessful learners that you can identify somebody's learning style of much more quickly than a successful learner. Which means ideally, when you look at a bunch of successful learners, you don't have to worry about how you teach because they're going to pick it up regardless. It's only the people that need your help that you tend to be able to identify their learning style right away, and that's ideal for teaching because that's the person you need to help the most. So, when my mother, for instance, is an auditory learner. She's learned to dance up into C1, but she, instead of having a vocabulary of 300 or so calls like the average C1 dancer, her vocabulary is actually about 2,000 calls, because every one of those concepts she learns is a different event. Plus, every spot that she learns it from is a different event. So a recycle over here in this part of the square and a recycle over there in that part of the square are 2 different animals. There also, when you apply a concept to it, she learns a series of calls that all have the word as couples in front of them, instead of learning one's principle and applying it across the board. Now, is she a bad dancer? No, she's really pretty good. But it's a radically different approach than what we would have thought of as instructors. I would teach the principle of as couples, and therefore everybody would be able to figure that out right away. And that's not true at all. Dancers and any student will show you how they learn. You hear them say, I don't see this, or tell me where to go, or I feel that. All those betray what learning style is their primary approach. So it means that when you're going to teach, you need to have about 6 approaches towards teaching a given call. Now, you don't teach 6 approaches at one time. You teach one approach, and then if there's a failure out on the floor, then you've got 5 other strategies to try. But you don't do it all 6 different times. You'll just confuse everybody that you're attempting to teach. I tend to take the philosophy that I want to let a problem develop before I solve the problem. So when I teach circle to a line, I don't teach about going under the arch or anything else right away. I let that feel of being whiplashed across the floor develop into something bad, and then I solve their problem. I look great. But more importantly is that they see the reason for the change in approach on how they dance it because of the problem that results in that. Therefore, I use the additional approaches to help solve problems rather than try to overwhelm the people that are learning all at the same time. It is really interesting that it is if a person as they've grown older or an adult is abused in a certain way, they lose that learning style aspect. And so if it happens to be their primary learning style, then it really incapacitates them as a learner. I had a woman that danced in one of my groups, and she had been verbally abused as a teen. As a result, she was never good on the teachers over the microphone. You know, when I normally did my lesson groups, I would hand out the worksheet after what we learned that night with the definitions and on it after the dance was over. And because I was under the philosophy that I wanted to be the primary instructor rather than that person picking up a call, and particularly if it was really involved, is getting overwhelmed by the instructions. With her, I had to give it to her the week ahead of time so she could study it and look at it, and then it didn't matter, you know, how much she couldn't understand the verbal approach to teaching something. What was interesting is that I had to learn patience as an instructor to realize that this was a handicap that we had to overcome as opposed to her being stupid or dumb or this or that, you know, labels that we apply to people that don't do things well. In particular, it was really always frustrating that after I'd gone through a teach and an explanation that everybody else seemed to have, she would raise her hand and her question would say basically she didn't hear anything I'd said for the last 5 minutes. So I had to learn to, you know, take the breath and realize that if I reacted negatively here, all she was going to hear was the negative tone and shut down further. So the only thing that I could really do was to take the breath and then try just as slowly as I could to try to explain the thing again. And usually would help through, but it was really frustrating as a teacher. But at the same time, I was being successful because I figured out a way towards her learning style and what she could do. And this approach of looking at calls in terms of auditory, visual, and tactile or kinesthetic, for instance, with an auditory learner, you're basically telling them where they're going to go. A great way to teach auditory learners is mnemonics, which are some associated action. Ed Foote is an excellent teacher in challenge and advanced field because so many of his call teaches feature little sound effects, this or that you associate with the call, and it's how you learn to differentiate between the different calls. So that's one approach, but for somebody that's not of an auditory learning style, that's not going to work well at all. With a tactile kinesthetic learner, it's not that I'm just saying you're going to end up looking at the wall that you're in front of you when you're done with the do-si-do. I give them a physical aspect of the wall. So let's say they were facing the back doors there. I would tell them they were looking at the back doors when they were done with the do-si-do. So that gives them a landmark that's in the room they're at, as opposed to just some kind of physical, visual aspect of being able to learn. So there's different strategies to approach different learning styles. Again, you only have to help the person that fails to learn as opposed to the person that learns well no matter what mode it's presented in. One way of, for instance, an auditory learner, which this is now actually a theory that police use when talking with subjects. Auditory learners look down when they are asked questions. They'll look left for stored information. They look right for information they're having to create. And eyes go up with the visual learner looking left for stored information, right for information they have to create. So the police know when you're lying, when you start looking up here, that you're thinking of your story as opposed to looking up the other way and actually relating the story that you experienced. And so it's now used as a common police interrogation technique. And it's one way you can start to identify people when you ask them questions about stuff. It's interesting that the kinesthetic learner is all just exactly opposite of the visual. What's even more interesting is that changes due to their handedness. Whatever I said if your handedness is left-handed as opposed to right-handed, then you look the other way and the indicators are the other way, just the opposite. So it's that detailed. Do you know that there's also a lead foot? Every human has a lead foot. The way you can find it out is have somebody turn around and then push them. They'll catch themselves with the lead foot. And it may be a left foot for some people, for a right foot for others, which means that if you want them to start on a particular foot, you may not be barking up the right alley for someone. And so, again, learners will always betray many of their learning styles and what goes on. I was with John Marshall one time, and the lady came up to us and she was trying to explain us how, she was having problems with recycle. And after we got done explaining it to her, she said, "Oh, you change hands." Well, all of us that call here in this room don't even think of recycle as a hand action. But if you think about being in the wave and the girl's in the center of the wave, then they do the recycle. She's holding her partner by a different hand. And that's the way she viewed it. So many times what you've got to do is be able to accept their explanation and figure out the reason for it, the rationale behind it. And then what it is that they're not learning wrong, they're learning different. And that leads you to find other strategies to help those people out. In particular, when you get responses back, we tend to correct their response when they give it to us in a way that isn't the way it's written in our definitions manual. But people learn all kinds of different ways than what's in that definition value. And so what you have to do is find a way to verify their approach or to show why their approach is wrong through their way of observing it. So it's a lot of work at the same time, but you tend to be a much more fruitful instructor. the one thing you got to realize is there's no one way to teach every call. You may find that there are ways that give you the most success, and that's wonderful, but every once in a while you're going to hit somebody that doesn't work that way, and you need to find a different approach rather than giving up on them. You know, we tend to see problems in square through, so I've done things as much as putting a chair in the middle of the floor or keys or money, something to make them look towards the middle as they turn. But, you know, there may be other people that need other methods of being shown what they're doing and where to go. You know, I know Betsy Gala, for instance, in teaching square through, actually teaches square through 1 first, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4. Drives me nuts when I sub in 4. But it's a way that she breaks up this routine of making it look like right and left through all the time. And in fact, right and left through doesn't occur until a teacher order until far after square through's been done. It's her attempt to eliminate the effort of people to courtesy turn on the second hand of a square through. So there's that your teaching approach, your order may have to be based upon the type of people you got. And so you need to evaluate those people in terms of what you think their learning style is and maybe reorganize your approach as need be. One of the things, I have a senior citizen group that dances about a 30 basic level. When I chose the calls that I wanted to do with this teaching approach, I decided that any call that involved 2 dancers facing opposite ways was bad. It made it really easy then to make the decision about what calls I kept and what calls I got rid of. So I threw out swing through, scoot back, touch a quarter, boys run. All those lead the dancers facing 2 different directions. And it was a real painless, no alamandars, no alamo rings, nothing along that line. But what I find is that there's a lot more danceability in people dancing with each other. There's lots of calls too, with wheel and deal and flutter wheel and cloverleaf and so forth. I've got all those, at my command, but it was a different approach to do things with. And I was still able to teach circulate, but from 2 face lines. But it was a way of getting, it kind of actually goes back to when I learned to dance in 62, there were no swing throughs, runs, trades, circulates, so forth. And it was after those calls came in the early 60s that the dancing seemed to take on a great deal of difficulty. And so I took the approach of getting rid of all those calls and seeing what we could go back and do. And as a result, these people dance it fairly well. There are people from their late 70s, and the oldest person I had was 99 in the group. And so, but it seemed to be a different way of approaching things, and it seemed to work as an approach. Now, that involves a lot of retooling of what you do for square dance calling. But it was taking a different approach with things and trying to find ways of making that methodology hit the different people that learned in different ways. So, I want to be able to get into a lot of questions and answers, and we're in shorter time periods here. So I'm going to go to John here, who's going to talk more about a specific methodology of doing things as opposed to general theory.
Actually, I'm going to more focus on what happens between the time you teach the call and the time you're really done teaching. What does it mean to learn? When you've taught somebody a call, do you want somebody who can recite the definition to you? Is that enough? Or do you want somebody who can move out at dance speed accurately every time and feel comfortable doing it? I think you want the second. How do you get to Carnegie Hall from here? Anybody remember that joke? Exactly. That's how people learn. People learn by properly paced, correct, complete practice. Now, as I talk, I'm going to be talking about absorbing things, learning things in sort of the sense of Mike's teaching them, remembering things, and forgetting things. So the learning part of this in what I mean here is getting it into you however it takes to get it into you. Maybe auditory, maybe kinesthetic, maybe visual, whatever. Recall is bringing it back so that you can do it somehow. And forgetting is, well, I forget. We're talking about two kinds of memory. In the long run, we're talking about getting things into long-term memory. In the short term, things will be in short-term memory. And by short-term, I don't mean what happened 2 minutes ago. I mean what happened in about the last 5 seconds. Short-term memory is where you pull things back from long-term memory and keep it there while you're actually doing it. When you hear something and are learning something, it has short-term memory, moves into long-term memory, and that's where it gets stored. So if you're learning the call right and left through, and let's say you haven't taught courtesy turn, just so I can make it complicated for a minute. You've got the right pull by, and now, ladies, stick your left hand out so the guy can find it. Guy, take her left hand in your left hand, put your right arm around her waist. And now, guys, you've got to walk backwards while she walks forwards, and the two of you hang on to each other and turn until you're facing back in. That's a lot of stuff to remember. And when you first teach the call, the poor guy is going to be going, all right, so I right pull by, that's good. Now I've got so I got my left hand, okay, and my right hand goes here, and now I'm going to step, oops, it's backwards. He's going to be pulling each of those little things back out of memory and doing it. Is this going to be fast or slow? Is it going to be accurate all the time, or is he going to make mistakes? Okay, we're going to come back to those in a minute. During the course of getting it into you, you're taking things in through your ears, your eyes, whatever, and moving it into long-term memory. But you're not just standing there listening. You're a dancer. You're doing the call, which means stuff's coming back out of long-term memory to be executed at the same time. You want to bet there's interference there? There is. So you're setting up attention during the first teaches between stuff coming in, stuff coming back out. You can do an initial teach. You can do a slightly faster second run through. You can do a slightly faster third run through. And then you get faster. By about the time you hit 5-6 repetitions, that's enough. You got to stop for a minute. People can't absorb anymore. From that first learning stage, people move into the stage where they're pulling it back each individual piece at a time. That's a stage of learning. It's an early stage. You move from there after some amount of practice to the point where some of that has been compressed into pieces you can do easily. Right pull by is now something I don't have to think about. Stick my left hand out so the lady can see it, put my right arm around her waist. You don't have to think about as much anymore, but you still have to think about backing up. You reach the point where you can do some of it automatically, and you're doing some of it off clues. Now the clues may be coming in from the caller. They may be somebody touching you. All sorts of possibilities. After you practice in that stage for a while longer, all of it gets to be pretty much automatic. And then you've reached the stage where recall is fast. It's pretty much accurate, but your execution maybe isn't as smooth as it could be, and you spend a long time. So you've got the beginnings of it. You've got the cognitive stage where you're pulling each piece back, the associative stage where you've got parts of it, and then you're down into automatic. And then it's long-term practice. As things smooth out, you learn to give weight, you learn what feels good, you learn what looks good when you execute it. And then at some point out that, you've got a real dancer who can dance the call. Where am I? Am here. So we've talked about the getting it in part. And you can practice, which is what the teaches are really. 4 or 5 times initially, and then you've got to give some time for things to sink in. During the cognitive stage, which is about another 20 or 40 repetitions of the call, you start out practicing frequently, and you start practicing less frequently over time. You get to the associative stage, you got another 40 repetitions or so, ever less frequently, until when things get to the automatic stage, you're down calling it about as often as you would call it normally. And then things just smooth out over time. Now, early in the game, first 2-3 stages, you're building a memory. And that memory is fairly fragile. It's subject to interference from things. If you learned 2 ladies chain and you're teaching flutter wheel, and the ladies step into the middle and they move across, and suddenly what they do on ladies chain interferes with what's supposed to happen on flutter wheel, and they do the wrong thing. Or somebody turns the wrong way on star through. And you come back and you call star through another couple of calls later, you can get interference from that miscue that he took or she took, turning the wrong way. Because the memory's fragile, it may be the real thing that comes back or it may be the wrong thing that comes back. That means early in the game, you've got to be really careful that the executions are accurate. They'll become more accurate automatically over time, but early in the game, you get it right. If somebody does the call wrong in about the first 5 times, it's going to take him a long time to learn the call. So we've gotten memory. We've gotten people remembering things. How long do you remember it? People learn pretty quickly in the course of an evening. I can teach 4 ladies chain. Circle left, ladies in, men sachet, ladies in, men sachet, element left, right and left grand, promenade home. People will get that very quickly. How long will they keep it? They won't keep it till next week. They'll keep bits of it. But they won't keep the whole thing because you haven't gotten it down to the automatic stage yet. It'll drop off. So that means week 2 of whatever happens, you pretty much have to reteach. And probably in week 3 you do a quick review because things are at the automatic, at the associative stage, not the automatic stage yet. So, properly paced, correct, complete practice. We've done the pacing part more or less. What could be incorrect practice? Can you think of something that might be incorrect about a practice? I sort of gave you one. Somebody makes a mistake and keeps making that mistake. That becomes part of what he's practicing, and you've got to stop it. The real bad one, how do you teach load the boat? Do the centers start through California twirl and pass through? If you've done a misteach and they're practicing something that's incorrect, they will learn that which is incorrect. Are you always cueing? People will learn what you teach, whether you think you're teaching it or not. And if you are constantly cueing, what they will learn is not how to pull the call back, but how to listen to your cues. If you stop cueing, you can also get incorrect action out of inadvertent fixed patterns. Head score through 4, swing through, boys run, wheel and deal. Okay, let's run through this again. Swing through, boys run, wheel and deal. Okay, let's run through it again. Swing through, boys run, wheel and deal. Okay, now let's swing through and have the boys trade. You want to guess what happened? The boys ran. They're probably halfway through the wheel and deal now too. Because what you taught them is not how to do swing through, or how to do boys run, or how to do wheel and deal, but that this thing always comes together. So it's an incorrect practice. And you've been reinforcing it. You look like you have one, I'm not sure. Or are you just, Steph? I was pointing at Steph, but if you got one, good. No? Okay. Yeah.
Well, actually I have one, but it's actually more of the cue getting to the point where it becomes the name of the call. We have a call on the plus list. We used to have a call called Trade the Wave. It's now called Take a Little Peek. You leave that out and just simply give them the call Trade the Wave, they won't perform it. Mm-hmm. And so, and for you in round dancing, across the years, there were so many people that actually cued part like a scissors, something on that line, instead of using the name that they've done scissors for a year, but they may not be able to scissors with that being the cue.
Sure. Complete practice. People will learn only as much as they practice consistently. the thing I'm always amazed by is how fast dancers learn that star through always ends in facing lines. Oh, you mean it doesn't? Try it. Try half sashayed star through and see if you get lines facing out. It's not been practiced. People practice, as I was moving, I turn till I'm facing in, because that's what they've seen. If you're teaching relay the deucey, are your first 10 practices always head square through 4 do-si-do, make a wave, and relay the deucey? Then I bet the headman knows one part of the call, and if he were on the other end of the wave, couldn't do it. So you got to be correctly paced so that people get it in right. It's got to be correct, or people will learn the wrong thing, and it's got to be complete, or they won't learn it as you want it done the next time. That covers the points I need to hit.
Well, and it's interesting. I had a gentleman that had started dancing in the late 40s, and he was finally taking advanced lessons from me in the mid 70s. And the problem was, very active dancer and very good one, except that practically every single call he had learned at a workshop at a dance and not as part of a lesson structure. So his knowledge was always incomplete. He knew relay the deucey from the one spot here, but not from everywhere else, because he'd never really been taught the call. He had learned how to survive the call. And so suddenly being able to, and what's more important is, as we build calls together at advanced, it was particularly hard for him to do because he didn't have a feeling for what parts started where and when you applied them.
Mm-hmm. Now, the fact you learn about like that over time. So you start here, you get faster at doing the call, and then you plateau. By the same token, over time, you get more accurate at doing the call. And the fact that these things are steep at the initial end has an important thing to tell all of us. You don't gain anything by doing incomplete teaches, because you're spending all the teach time and all the initial practice time on one position instead of 2 positions, and that's the minority of the time. If you do a complete teach and practice completely, you get 1.1 to 1 times as much time to teach things thoroughly as it is to teach it. Not enough. Three, 4.
We're on. I'm not getting it. 1, 2. Good.
Stephanie Langhoff, California. I used to teach karate, and we had a saying in karate, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So I completely agree with your thesis. But, how to teach perfect isn't obvious to me. And what I'm hearing you say is one of the aspects of teaching perfect is to teach completeness. So if I'm teaching relay the deucey, during the initial teach of that, I should show them relay the deucey from all possible positions, from right-hand waves, left-hand waves. I mean, where do you kind of draw the line? As an example. So what can you say about a strategy to teach perfectly?
Perfection is in the eye of the beholder. And as with many things in square dancing, a lot of it is taste. If you're talking about teaching dancers who are going to go out and dance in the regular world, you don't really need to go into all of that. Because in reality, you know that most dancers will not be exposed to left-hand wave relay the deuceys without a lot of help. So, up to you. I happen to teach My canonical teach for Relay the Deucey is left-hand waves with the men in one half of the wave and the women in the other half. Because by that point in my class, the dancers don't know the difference. But that's me. When you're teaching, you've basically got to adopt the philosophy that you're the facilitator in this segment. It's a matter of how you organize the material and present that in a problem-solving way. This is a series of 13 letters. So if I had you just to try to memorize these 13 letters and handed it to you, it would take quite a long time for you to remember it. However, if I use a technique called clumping, now we have SOS, USA, VIP, and RSVP. You probably can remember all that just with a little bit of study. It's how you organize the material and how you present it that gets to be really vital in leading to successful learning. Let's cycle back. Sir.
Just to add one thing to that, Brett Kapperman from Renton, Washington. When you teach Relay the Deucey as an example, my guess is, at least the way I teach it, is I say, in this case, start with your right. Or sometimes I don't even say that. Because I think if you say right hand, swing half, the problem is that people get that right hand stuck in their head and they always think it's a right hand. How do you teach it? Do you even say it's a right hand or you just start off an end dancer and adjacent center?
Everybody swings half. And that really takes care of it. Everybody swings half.
Chris Day, Manchester, England. When you look at students and you say, well, they're never going to get these moves, you have to think, well, why don't they get the moves? We had this guy, very intelligent guy, and we said, well, what do you do as a career? I'm an airline pilot. So how do you do 3/4? Oh, it's a percentage. But go percentage. Not with 3 hands or whatever you do. Go to that angle. No problem.
270 degrees. Boom.
Yeah, that's it.
Yep.
And there was another one we had, and young lady, head in the clouds, smiling away, long hair, didn't realise she had a hearing problem. Put a loop round. One of the best students. He graduated. You don't realise.
Indeed. I'm not advocating that you teach the way I teach. I teach for a fairly exactly special group of people.
And it's not so much that he's got more talented people or anything else. It's also people that have danced to him for a while.
Yeah.
By the time, unless you've been contracted to go to a group you've never been before to teach Relay the Deucey, then you've got an environment where they've been from day one. The very first time they've seen an ocean wave was in your hands. So if you spend 95% of your time in right-hand waves, then of course they're going to have problems with anything left-hand wave-oriented. If you try to equalize the amount of time they're in different spots, then you'll find that they'll adjust well to different places and handle something different and strange. But it's totally up to you how you present the material.
And remember, the point of all of this is execution at dance speed, accurately, enjoyably. If what you're teaching is not what those people enjoy doing, they're not going to have fun. If you have a group that really wants to come to the dance and not think, that's a good group of people. You teach them one way. If you've got a group that wants to come to the dance and think to forget about what happened at work, you teach them very differently.
You know and realize that there are plenty of dancers out there that can do stuff if they're just given the opportunity. It's a matter of whether we allow them to have that opportunity. So the question becomes, is at the end of the first time of Relay the Deuce and they did it successful to the music, are they cheering or are they glad it's over? If they're glad it's over, then obviously you're going to have problems presenting other material in the future. If they're enthused about it, then obviously you're going to have more successful learners of material because they've gotten interested in it. It's going to be a matter of reading reaction.
And to add to that, again, Brett Kaplan from Renton, Washington, to add to that, I think it's us as callers and teachers, a lot of times, or most of the time, we misinterpret them not understanding what we're saying. I mean, that's what you're saying in essence here is that we need to learn how to read and understand that learning style.
If they didn't understand, it's not their fault. It's my fault.
When I did one of these a number of years ago, the technique I started the presentation with was I said the Russian words for listen to me 3 times, one consecutively louder after the other. And of course I got different responses from the crowd and everything else, and I said afterwards, I said, this is Russian for listen to me. You'll notice that at no point that in yelling louder did you understand me better. Mm-hmm. So it's too often we repeat the bankrupt strategy figuring, well, if I do it one more time, they're finally going to get it, instead of finding some other strategy to make them successful at it. That's the important of the learning style approach of things, is finding different ways of solving problems for the dancers there. If one way doesn't get it, then perhaps another way will.
And you brought out the notion of you've got to look for what around might be causing the miss. And talk to the person and listen and find. Because so much of this, especially how you get it into somebody, is individual. You can take averages and do groups, but in the long run, it's every individual that's got to get connected with.
Stephanie Langhoff again. Another experience from my karate teaching days, I taught karate for quite a while, is that kids learn very differently than adults. I mean, if I wanted to teach a kid a chop, I'd say, do that, and they could do it. Adults, they wanted an analytical explanation, of the kinematics and, of everything. And, I've had a little experience teaching kids square dancing. Yep. And my observation in square dancing was also that kids learn actually much faster than adults, but differently as well, and my biggest problem was really maintaining their, attention and not teaching them, because they picked up stuff really quickly. So could you speak a little bit about your experiences with teaching kids versus adults? Do you agree that there's a sort of a different learning process?
Kids are sponges. I've done a little bit of teaching kids to dance, and it's tempting to interpret the fact that they're hacking off and running around and not really interested as they're not listening to you and they haven't learned. The fact of the matter is they learned it 6 repetitions ago, and you've lost their attention because they're bored.
To some degree, yeah, they do learn. But I think it's the distance from the learning environment. In other words, they have just learned how to learn. So they're in an environment constantly where they're learning, so extending it to one more situation and one more different scenario is not any different. You take adults who may not have been in any kind of school learning situation for 20 to 25 years, they've forgotten how to learn. And you have to reintroduce them to that. You'll notice that there are adults who learn very quickly, and I'll tend to bet you that they're still in some kind of learning environment, whether they're still a teacher or teaching somewhere or doing some kind of instruction work somewhere within their job, that they're still good learners because they have never lost the skill. So I think it's much more of a question than just being age-related, as much as how closer you are to the learning process and how far away you may have gotten from it.
Daryl had a point, I think.
Daryl Clendenin, Portland, Oregon. What is it that I can do with a person that no matter how many different ways I try to get across the message of how to do a right and left through, they still can't do it? I've shown them, I've explained it to them, I've had that particular person within the couple and gone through it over and over and over and over, and regardless of how many times I explain that the natural body flow as they pull by the right is to want to turn left, they seem to understand it, but still, as they pull by the right, rather than reaching with the left, they'll turn left.
So what you are seeing is failure really early in the call. if I'm hearing you right. He's pulling by and turning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Practice 50 times, and then the minute you start calling.
Gone. So at risk of putting myself in contradiction with myself, right pull by, don't turn. Do words do anything?
They don't seem to.
Oh, you got a winner there.
Do they have trouble with ladies' chain?
No.
Okay. I listened to an really old lesson tape of Dick Jones from years ago, and he had taught right and left through and ladies' chain on the same night, and his approach on the teach was that he taught right and left through second after the ladies' chain. And he said, well, it's the same call except everybody pulls by on the right and left through, and just the ladies pull by on the ladies' chain. We go into talking about both of those being courtesy turns, even though one is really different from the other one. But his teach also on ladies' chain was for the guy to step over and turn back. So it looked very much like the regular courtesy turn.
I'm definitely going to give that a try. I'm going to look at it with that aspect in mind. Tomorrow night, as a matter of fact. I do teach courtesy turn as a separate movement, a movement by itself. And I teach it long before I teach a right and left through. And it's always worked out very nicely that way, because then all I have to do is add the right hand and pull by, and now everybody courtesy turn. For her, I don't know why.
I have a thought.
One of the things is that there are some people that learn by building blocks. There are other people that learned by tearing things down. Historically in development of choreography and square dancing, our calls have developed by tearing calls apart, not building them together. When you stop and think that before trade by was barge through, and that partner trade finally came out of trade by, and it was not a case of building it up, it was tearing it down that we got the call. There's a number of other calls that have gone through that kind of history of we tore them apart to get the parts we got now instead of building them up.
I have a thought for your guy who's having trouble. If, and I'm not quite sure how to do it, but let me get to the effect I'm after. If his attention is on his partner while he's doing the call, then he's way more likely to focus in on her. Okay, good.
Don't take your eye off her.
Yeah, that didn't help.
Wayne West in Texas. One thing that I've experienced is the same thing where they turned the wrong way, and I tried to analyze it and things, and I found out that they were holding on to the right hand too long. And what I finally worked with them a little bit, instead of a complete pull by, was that as they pulled by, the man would direct the lady the other way. And that got her turning the correct direction. And then she was in position for the courtesy turn.
But did you notice how he did, when he gestured here, he closed the thumb for the pull by, okay? Is the way to stop people from doing that is have them not close their thumbs. You present a flat hand, and you can't grab anything with a flat hand, and so they just graze each other as they independently walk by. If you remember years ago when we did that body flow session together,
the square through one,
and we discovered that on square through that if we had the people dance it with their palms up, that they could just graze each other and everybody was under control of their own body as they made all the turns. And so that's part of our problem here is that we had too much contact and then we end up getting people pulled the wrong way for doing the call.
That's worth a shot.
Bill Ponton, Reno, Nevada. This might not be just exactly what Daryl is having a problem with, but I have a dancer that's dyslexic. And this gentleman is 65 years old. He dances in my A2 club. It was always a problem for him to learn, not because he was not intelligent and not because he could not learn the calls, but, in a cast of shadow, whatever, he's sometimes going to turn the wrong way. So if there's some way that somebody's having a problem learning something and you find out that they are dyslexic, this might help you in order to approach it from a different standpoint.
So
and it's like Chris was talking about, is first off, you need to find out the background of the person, how they may have solved their problems in different ways, and find out what is the best route of appealing things to. Particularly with the example of the airline pilot, it is finding out what the person does for a living. There may be terminology or actions there that you connect up with suddenly a mental image that you don't connect up with any other set of words. My ex-wife Michelle, of course, is chairman of the Handicapable Committee, and it's dealing with people severely handicapped in a number of different ways, and finding ways of getting through. And what's really neat about our hobby is that it's connected to music. And as they've done more and more medical research, they found that Alzheimer's and music have a connection in that, helping to deal with their problems and so forth. There's the effect of music on autistic students. And so does he have more trouble with the walkthrough than the dance part? More trouble with the dance part. See, so, it may be, here's the case where the music interferes. It gives him a distraction that it may be that normally he can overcome his dyslexia in a given situation as long as he concentrates. You put music on that causes him to be distracted, and suddenly he reverts back to type instead of letting him have his control over the situation. I'm not saying get rid of the music, but you may realize that your music is a competitor that it isn't for anybody else.
Lori Tucker from the Bay Area. One of the techniques that the instructor uses in a couple of clubs I belong to, if she's having a particular problem with people turning the wrong way or veering off in the wrong way, she'll have them dance without touching hands. Put your hands behind your back and think about where you have to go. Don't depend on your partner to start turning it. And I think what it does is it really, tends to reduce the reliability you have on somebody else in the square in order to help you learn a particular direction or motion that you need to do. But once she does that, most of the students pick it up much quicker.
It brings me back to another point. Nobody says you got to stay up there to teach. Getting out on the floor and demonstrating. I found my senior citizens group I was teaching circle to align to, and there were several people that had problems with it. Well, I could let the frustration level build up and still have the problem, or what I did do was to put the microphone down and got in each of their places and showed them what I was trying to make a verbal picture of. The verbal picture wasn't getting through, but the physical picture got through right away. They could at least imitate what I was doing. And so I finally got the point across there, and we were successful doing it. But it took quite a while, but it was a matter of getting in there and subbing for people and then taking control of the situation. I mean, ultimately animals are trained, they train elephants by putting the tame elephant and the wild elephant together, and eventually one controls the other. I mean, it's the same thing out there. If ultimately you're the good dancer and maybe the only one there, then you're going to have to get out there and demo.
And actually getting out there, thinking back to Daryl, give you a basis for diagnosis. If you dance the ladies part opposite that guy, you're going to find out whether he's pulling by and pulling himself off balance or not.
Yeah, you may get, the one thing Daryl talked about there, I don't think he talked about getting out there and doing it with them, is that he may find out what that person's doing wrong that causes the whole problem to begin with. It's like it'll set off, warnings and it'll suddenly be a revelation once you're able to analyze what's going on and why you're short-circuiting in that particular situation. Part of it is also, if you're faced with a situation where you got to teach them to plus in 20 weeks, it's hard to find the time to devote to all this stuff. However, we're going through dancers at such a rate, if we don't start an ecology movement within square dancing to conserve the ones we got or the ones we're getting in the door, then we're never going to go anywhere. And so it's going to take that extra effort to do it. It's demanding. I mean, teaching is ultimately the most demanding job in square dancing. And it's at the same time one of the most fulfilling ones.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for coming. We're at the end of our time here. Hope you all enjoyed it. And
we'll take